Welcome back to the Angel Health Podcast. Today we have Teresa Laroo, and I'm super excited to have you on because you've had two sons receive a cord blood transplant and then became sort of an advocate in the stem cell space yourself. So I know you have a wealth of knowledge around cord blood banking and the stem cell space. Yeah, you're actually our first guest that has a direct relationship with receiving a stem cell treatment. Yeah, we mainly had physicians talk about pregnancy and birth and how cord blood banking works. So yeah, I'm super excited to have you here today.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate the opportunity. It's been a few years since I've been able to really share our story and just continue to inform parents and families about the benefits of cord blood. So really happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'd love if you could start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the cord blood space and your boy's experience as well.
Sure. I was fortunate to meet my husband at 15, and we started our family pretty young. We knew we wanted to have a large family. So I felt like I was pregnant kind of back to back for several years, but it wasn't until after the birth of our fourth son, our third son, they were just about 13 months apart. They were all pretty close in age. After Blake was born, Lane came down with just a fever, his first fever. I was fortunate to be a stay-at-home mom, and the kids were kind of not out in the world so much. No one had started school, so I felt like they were kind of in a little bit of a cocoon. But Lane got sick, all the normal things, took him to the pediatrician. There's just something that I felt was a little different about his illness. His fever seemed really high. He was really, really lethargic. So after some doctor's appointments, we realized he was struggling with something much bigger than just a normal fever. He proceeded to decline very, very quickly. With a matter of 2 weeks, he was in intensive care, and they were trying to rule out leukemia or some other diseases, but the doctors kept informing us that it was something similar, but they were having a hard time diagnosing him. So it was about 3 weeks from his first fever to the time that he actually passed away. Obviously, we were devastated. That's not even the correct word, because it just was something that I couldn't fathom, understand. Our hearts were broken, and we couldn't believe that our young family, our little Lane, got so sick and passed away. So the doctors encouraged us to continue to come in. They had an idea of what they thought it was. They thought it was very rare. They thought it was genetic based. And after some time of healing, we knew we had to have the other boys tested. And we received the news, unfortunately, that two of our other three children, boys, were also diagnosed with what they thought was called Duncan's disease, or X-linked lymphoproliferative disease, which is basically an immune disorder. So that started our journey on trying to discover how to get our boys healthy. And bone marrow was very common back then. This was in the mid 90s, 96. And at the same time, they started to discuss this newest procedure that they felt our boys would be eligible and have a higher success rate, which was called cord blood transplant. Same procedures as a bone marrow, but using the cord blood from an infant child. And it's the stem cells that are remaining in the cord after birth.
So I know you mentioned a bone marrow transplant. Were there other potential options for treatment, or was that kind of the central path forward?
Because we were so unsure of which path and which direction to go and what would be better for the boys, we pursued both. We actually did find a perfect match bone marrow. At the same time, they were putting the boys through the two largest cord blood registries at the time. One was in New York, but they also expanded that international.
Okay.
So we eventually found both options for both boys.
Okay, cool. So I know you mentioned you were looking for donors for cord blood. Was there discussion of if you had banked your own cord blood, or what were kind of the options if you had your own cord blood banked?
Obviously, we would have done anything to find an option for our boys. We tested for bone marrow. We had our older son who was not affected, Aaron. He was tested. He wasn't a match that was viable to do the bone marrow. But we also considered that question as well. But the problem with that is because I am the actual carrier, we would have to do a lot of genetic testing to make sure that that child was the correct match. And we still had 2 boys to do that with. The time that would take would have probably not been beneficial for the boys.
Right.
And had we saved theirs, unfortunately, we would not have been able to use theirs because it did carry the marker for the disease.
But if Aaron had his cord blood saved who did not
Yeah.
have XLP, then you may have been able to use his.
Yes, because a sibling match, obviously, even if it's not a perfect match, would have been much better than just a donation, which is what we ended up going with.
Okay, I see. Do you know why a sibling donation would be preferred over a random donor?
Just because there's certain things that are familial and they can test. I'm sure the testing now is it's even progressed even from the time that we went through this, but there's so many things that they still can't specifically test for. So a sibling match is obviously the best match.
Right.
And even a cord blood is better than a bone marrow. A 4 out of 6, they used to do the markers of 6 out of 6.
Yeah.
4 out of 6 cord blood is better than a 6 out of 6 bone marrow because the cord blood is so pure and the bone marrow carries the history of the recipient. So it has all of those things that can fight the new body that it's going into.
Okay, I see. And I know you mentioned you started having kids kind of young, but one thing that we always chat about with potential folks that want to bank cord blood is whether or not they have a history of disease in the family. And I always kind of mention my own story, and my brother had cerebral palsy. And we do actually have a history of cancer in my family, but cerebral palsy obviously isn't a genetic thing. So I always mention that to parents and that they don't necessarily have to have family history of disease. But did you have any indicators that there might be issues?
No, we didn't. And then as we started to learn about the disease, this is a specific immune disease, but there's many, many different diseases that correlate to the immune system. I come from a family with 4 brothers. I'm the youngest sister. This is a disease that's carried from mother to son. The first questions the doctors asked when they were trying to diagnose before we got all the blood work back was, did we have a history of this? And we just didn't. I think my great grandmother had lost a son some point down the line, but it's really, it's a disease that's passed from mother to son.
I see.
And daughter to daughter.
Yeah.
So the daughters are the carriers. I'm a carrier. I don't have the disease, but I do carry. I have 2 X markers to give. And Aaron, my oldest son, got my good marker. And the other boys, unfortunately, got the marker that carried the disease.
Okay. So I'd love to chat more about your experience with finding a donor. Because a lot of parents that we chat with explore like what would their options be if they don't bank cord blood, which is usually to find a donor. So to your knowledge, why was it so difficult to find a donor, and what did that process look like?
We worked very closely with the hospital as we were learning about both options. They were the ones to kind of guide that path, tell us about certain cord blood banks, or the Red Cross was doing the bone marrow. We worked very closely with them. We didn't know which way to go, to be truthfully honest. Cord blood was still relatively new. My husband made it a priority for him to talk to some of the biggest doctors at the time who were doing the majority of the cord blood transplants and really just getting informed. The more research we did, the more doctors we talked to all over the United States, the more we just kept we just feel like this cord blood is the way to go. So then how do we find the match for our kids? So the biggest bank in New York was the cord blood registry. I think they have between 5 and 10,000. They put them through within a couple of days. We had, I would say, 5 options. So then they take those options and they do specific testing to see how close a match are. I think at some point when they start to pass certain tests, they even put the bloods together just to see how they're going to react. And that is how we found our first match for our son Blake. And we decided we wanted to go ahead and go that direction. We had a perfectly matched bone marrow, but even though the cord blood was less of a match, we still felt that those infant stem cells that were so pure that we would have the best outcome.
And then you had to find a second donor, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
How did you go about finding the second donor?
We didn't have a great success for Garrett. At the time, he was 2, and we had to make the decision to just do therapeutic with him to keep him healthy and go into the process with Blake. During the time we were in the hospital with Blake, when they opened up the search internationally, we found the cord blood bank for Garrett in Germany.
So how did the process look like of them receiving the stem cell treatment? Like, was it intravenous and over time, or how did it work logistically?
That part was the easiest part of the whole process. They come in with this little bag of pink cells. It took about 30 minutes. They had catheters in the boys that went through their chest, and that's it. And then it's just kind of a waiting game to see how long it's going to take for these stem cells to start producing and doing their job.
Okay, I see. And I know when I chatted with Aaron, your other son, he mentioned that they had received chemotherapy first. Do you know why they received chemotherapy first, and what the job was of the cord blood stem cells at that point?
Yeah. So with my children's disease, they have to completely obliterate the immune system. So they had pretty intensive chemo. It was 8 days. Not fun. That
Yeah.
part was not fun. They were pretty sick. They were very healthy, thankfully, going in. We caught the disease so early that they didn't have any of those beginning kind of problems that other kids, have going into this process. So they were pretty depleted going into the actual process of them receiving the stem cells. And then the doctors just kind of explained to us that every time they took a breath, it's going to push those stems. It'll go into their bloodstream. It'll push it through their bones, and little bits will just continue to get deposited. And every time those get deposited, they're going to multiply. And when they multiply enough, and then we can start to see them in their blood test, that's when we know it's working.
Okay. So basically rebuilding their immune system.
So they're knocked out to zero. They have no blood products. Their immune system is basically shut down. They're not producing anything. They're not producing red blood, white blood, platelets. So everything has to be given to them until their body can catch up, until the stem cells can get in there and do what they need to do.
I see. What is it about XLP that requires their immune system to be wiped?
They can't have any of those leftover cells. Everything has to be taken out so that the new immune system will be completely donor.
Okay, I see. And how did it go after receiving the transplant? Like, did they have any side effects as a result of the stem cell transplant or anything like that?
They had side effects of not having an immune system. So
Yeah.
fevers. Blake had the toughest time. He was a baby at the time. He was 9 months. He went in. That's
wow.
what it was when he went into transplant. So he was a little guy. I think I want to say he was day 14 when we started to see a little glimmer of hope that something was happening there, that the stem cells were starting to grow in his system. And at the time he needed it to start. He was really suffering with side effects that had really more to not with the cord blood, but with the process of all the chemo and just wiping out a system. That's what we needed to happen for him. And honestly, as soon as that started to take effect, the things like the fevers and the chills and his eating and the sores, everything that was associated to wiping a system out started to disappear.
And I know you mentioned after they received the treatment, you kind of started becoming an advocate around like cord blood and stem cells in general. Aaron, your other son, mentioned that I think it's your husband is a firefighter, and he's kind of like raising a lot of awareness around it and things like that. So yeah, I'd love to get a picture of what your knowledge was around stem cells and cord blood up to this point, and then your work related to that afterwards.
We were very fortunate as a family. My husband had just so much support from the fire department. My father-in-law was a LAPD detective. The boys needed so much blood, platelets, everything. And we had so much support from start to finish. I think Red Cross told me our family was a part of putting 200,000 people on the bone marrow registry. And when my boys needed the blood, they just gave out a call and everybody showed up for them. It was about 2.5 years we stayed in the hospital trying to keep the boys safe, little setbacks, things that kind of occurred. So we were in that system for a long time, and we just were so grateful for all of the support and love. Then when the boys started to get healthy and I really had a chance to digest what the possibilities, we knew the doctors told us at the time that this would in the future be a repair kit for everybody. If you have one saved cord blood, it can be utilized for so many different things. I always knew that the potential was great. And I was approached by a company locally where we lived, and they wanted me to just get out and kind of, just start talking to moms about it, and talking to doctors, and just sharing our story, and understanding that I think for me, after several years, I still, even now today, I don't understand why more people aren't saving it. And it's just wasted. It feels like such a tragedy. That's
Yeah.
what it feels like to me. And so the company I was working for, they really were trying to get the word out so they could accept donations. We were lucky to find our match, but like you said, you couldn't find one for your brother. It's
Yeah.
if you have any, there's so many cultures now are getting mixed, and it's just they're not represented in some of these banks, and it's really sad. We continue to have a relationship with UCLA. We started a foundation after our son. It's called Lane's Legacy, and we would talk to parents because we never had a chance to even meet somebody that had survived, or meet the children, or talk to people. So we just really put ourselves out there to help in any way that we could educate. We raised money so that we could either help with hospital bills, save your cord blood, whatever we could do to help people understand the importance of these cells, and that it's just horrible that they're just getting wasted.
Yeah, I see. So I remember, I think one article that I read was in the LA Times that you guys were the first to receive a cord blood transplant in the LA area. And so yeah, so you guys were kind of used as an example for that. And do you
Yeah.
know if others were able to receive cord blood transplants after you guys as well, even for other use cases?
Oh yeah. So Blake was number one, and then another little boy, I'll just say his first name because I'll never forget him. His name was Billy. He had leukemia. We kind of overlapped our visit with when we were at the hospital. And then Garrett was number three. But I know all three of who I am personally in the know of, all three of the boys are still doing really well.
Oh wow, that's
Very
awesome.
healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. My next question was, how are your boys' health now?
They're men now. And they are very healthy. Garrett is a firefighter for LA County. He followed in his dad's footsteps. He now has three children, which this will make me cry.
Oh yeah.
The doctors told us it would not likely happen for the boys. So the fact that that has been able to come true is just such a blessing. And then my little Blake, I mean, he's not little, he's now 29, but he had some complications after he had some brain bleeds, and he had some things that just went on that we just kept telling the stem cells, please do your work. And a couple years after his transplant, they took a scan of his brain and the bleeds were gone. And he's so bright. Like, I'm so proud of him. So all the boys are just doing really, really well.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Do you know how Billy's doing as well?
Yes, I actually heard from the mom a few years ago, and he's now a man, married. I didn't ask about the children with leukemia. I'm not really sure, what. I think he had to
Yeah.
do some radiation, which I think was a little more difficult. But sorry, I dropped you.
Okay.
But he is, but Billy's doing well too.
Okay, awesome. So I know when we had chatted previously, you mentioned that you got involved with Dr. Kurtzberg as well, who's someone that I also know of and actually met at a cord blood conference a couple of years ago, because she does a lot of the work with cerebral palsy. But I'd love to know more about your experiences with Dr. Kurtzberg and how you got in touch. And I know today she seems to mostly work on things related to cerebral palsy and autism, but would love to know more about what she was doing then.
We struggled with making sure that we were at the right location for the boys. We knew staying close to our home base would have a lot of family support, and UCLA was in our backyard basically. But we also wanted to make sure that we were exploring every option. And she, at the time, was the one who had done the most and had the most success with cord blood. It was still in its infancy with her. I think she had about 10 that were all successful. And she was so gracious. She made so much time for us. I think back on this time on how God put so many people in our path that really just helped us to kind of narrow our focus and really feel so confident about our decision and the direction we were going to go. It's hard because we're dealing with cord blood that we knew had a success rate versus something that was still so relatively new.
Mhm.
But in the end, she shared all of her protocols, which were the protocols going into the cord blood transfusion, is the chemotherapies, what type, how many days, the doses. She literally sent it to my husband and he printed it out and he had it on the wall at the hospital. So every time the nurses came in, he would check and he would make sure. So those are she followed up and followed through, and she really was there for us. She assured us if UCLA would do a great job, and having that extra support was also very therapeutic. So
Yeah.
we decided to stay.
Okay, that's great. So it's you mentioned doses. Did your boys get more than one stem cell transplant, or was it just that one time and then you kind of observed its effects over time?
They only needed the one dose.
Okay, interesting. Do you know anything about the donors?
I was able to write them letters and send pictures, which was very nice. I had the bank in Germany. They invited me actually to go out and take a look at their facility. They had a pretty big bank. I don't know where they're at now in terms of I'm hoping and praying that there's a lot of banks and a lot of options and people are either saving or donating. But I was able to write letters and just thank those moms because I don't know that they really know the gift that they gave us.
That's amazing. Yeah, on the topic of donation versus banking, I guess if you were chatting with a parent that was currently pregnant and they're deciding between the two, what are your thoughts on donation versus banking and what parents should choose?
I would say it's a personal decision. If you were planning on just one child, I would bank it. And if you had the option in your city and you were having multiple children and the hospitals, sometimes hospitals have the option, but no one asks. So I would say if your plan is to have a large family, at least save one.
Okay, awesome. I'm curious if you've continued to follow the cord blood space following your boy's treatment. I know you mentioned you did a bit of kind of press for cord blood and stem cell work. But yeah, have you seen research evolve over time?
Just what I've heard. I haven't we've had some other tragedies that have happened in our life as well. My husband passed away, and so that took up a lot of space for me.
Yeah.
But now we're all healing and we're on the other side of that. And just interesting. I was visiting a doctor for something else, and they started mentioning stem cells and how it's therapeutic for rejuvenating knees and all this other therapy where they just do the injections. But then my question is, where are you guys getting the stem cells from? A cow? I don't know. So it's an interesting space. And since talking with you last week, I did just a little bit of search on it. And like I said, I just feel like I'm surprised that there's not more awareness.
Yeah, my one of my last questions is why do you think so few parents even know about it or are moved to either donate or bank? Because I think a majority just still gets thrown away and there's actually been recently a sort of conspiracy spiraling on social media about how physicians are just selling placentas and selling umbilical cords, which I don't think is true. I've asked many physicians. But yeah, I guess I'm curious as well why more parents don't do it.
That's such a good question. I feel like the focus is it's such an internet world. TikTok, I'm not sure that I fully understand it, but everybody's getting fed by the right stroller and have everything is just it's so retail generated. And unless someone sparks it, I just don't think parents are thinking that it's ever going to happen to them. When you're young and you're just living your life and you're married and you have all this excitement, especially with a new baby, and it all feels so good. And I think to think that it's just counterproductive to all the feelings that you're having. And you just don't ever think it's going to happen to you. I certainly didn't.
Mm.
I in my eyes, I had 4 healthy children. I was the most blessed mom. I just could never have imagined what was going to just be right around the corner for us. There was
Mhm.
just no way for me to predict or even for that thought to come in my brain. I guess that's the best answer I could give.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting that more folks don't talk about it. There's been an increasing number of regulation Right now it's in around 31 states. They have kind of an official recommendation to inform parents about it. But I still get a ton of comments on social media around like, I gave birth last week and no one told me. And it was just to their knowledge thrown away. So yeah, definitely something we're trying to change.
I think a little bit with the doctors, and I sadly say this, but unless it is something they can benefit from. I remember walking into doctors' offices, I would see a brochure, but no one really sat down and really talked about it and
Mhm.
said, here's some options, or look into it, or I don't know. There's a brochure sitting there, and I guess when you're bored, you can pick it up and read it. But I think it's good to hear that you're saying 31 states are saying that the doctors have to have this conversation. That's amazing. It should be every state, but
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, I know you mentioned Billy's story, but have there been any other cord blood related treatment stories that you've been privy to as a result of being involved in the space, or other stories that you've kind of followed and seen, especially if it's other diseases outside of XLP?
outside of XLP, I know that the success rate is very high, and the long term overall health of the person. A lot of times things can go awry with cord blood. There can be, the body can fight it. There can be with the suppressants. What are the suppressants called? Where they have to suppress the immune system
Yeah,
to kind of keep it
yeah.
immunosuppressant.
Did your
Um,
son take immunosuppressants because they already didn't have an immune system?
they had enough of immune system, which is why they needed the chemo to wipe it out. But they came back all donor,
Mm,
100% donor. At the 2 year mark, they were all donor. It even changed their blood type.
mm.
So if they wanted to do the genetic testing online, I said, but that's not your blood.
Yeah,
So
I think Aaron mentioned this to me that if your sons did like 23andMe,
yeah,
that person who was the donor would show up as their twin.
right. Yeah. So it's kind of fascinating. I don't know. Maybe that's
Yeah.
how they'll eventually find their donor one day.
Mhm.
We do know that they were both males. That's all
Right.
I know. But I know that with XLP, there's been at the time there were 3 survivors, and I had 2 of them, and
Mm,
now there's in the hundreds. Which I know that for XLP, it definitely is the better path is to go with cord blood.
yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, that's all the questions that I had, but is there anything else that you'd like to share with especially pregnant parents? Yeah, what message would you have for them? And also anything else just in the cord blood space or XLP or anything like that?
I think I would just love that every parent have the opportunity to get the information, and whatever decision they decide with their partner or with their family, at least they're going into it with some knowledge. So I love that you guys are doing TikTok and all these other things. So I love that, because I think this is a different generation of parents. And so, but I feel like as long as the information was given, and whatever it is they decide, it's the right choice for them. But I definitely, from my own personal experience, it's very, very valuable, not only for siblings, but for many, many things. And I love that your company you've taken it to the next step, and you're also saving the placenta and the actual cord. I just think that the future potential of that is probably unlimitless. And if I had the chance to go back, I would have absolutely done that. And I think people are more knowledgeable about how perfect the female body is, and how amazing how we create these babies in our bodies, and then just what's all this benefit of everything that that comes out with the baby too. So I know my daughter-in-law had all natural babies, and they saved portions of both. My son that had the cord blood transplant, he saved his oldest son's cord
Mm.
blood. I don't know if I shared that with you. I
Oh,
didn't know
yeah, I
this.
didn't know that. Okay,
So
awesome.
he told me, yes. He said, Mom, I told you. And I said, okay, well. So I guess I would just love to be able to find a way to get the information out to every parent, so that they can make an informed decision. Don't let cost be a factor. That's what I would say.
Okay.
You don't need the $3,000 stroller. Just
Yeah, for
get the
sure.
grandparents to help.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome that your son did end up saving cord
Yeah.
blood. He already knew about it, I assume, from his own experience, or did it come out some other way?
He obviously knew about it. They went back and forth and back and forth, and in the end, he decided that they should do it. He benefited from a donation, but he still really understood that the saving it had way more value. So they decided to do that.
Okay, that's amazing to hear. Awesome. Well, yeah, I really appreciate you being on here today. I know it's kind of highlighting a more difficult time in your life, I assume. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing. I think one thing that I always thought about when my brother passed away is it was obviously sad for me, but it also made me feel equally as sad to watch my mom go through it because I feel like it just occurred to me that it's so against the order of what you expect to happen in life. So, yeah, ever since that happened to me and I observed my mom go through that, I really admire parents that take care of sick children or have children passed away because I think it's just so the opposite of what you expect from the hierarchy of life. Like I think kids always grow up expecting that someday like they may have to take care of their parents, but yeah, it just seems backwards to do the opposite. So yeah, I applaud your strength.
Well, thank you, honey. I was able to really understand my blessing after losing Lane. We certainly could have lost all of the boys, and I'm beyond grateful that that wasn't God's plan. I feel like Lane is always with me anyway, so it's and he's a part of his brother's healing, and he's really the reason that they were diagnosed and were able to get to a place of being in a position to get healthy. So he was
Yeah.
my little angel. So I love talking about him. So thank you for
Yeah.
allowing me to do that.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is really special. Like I said, you're the first yeah, person connected to a cord blood transplant that we've had on the podcast. So I really appreciate you sharing the story and being
My
vulnerable.
pleasure.
It was great to hear about. Okay, well, thank you.
Best of luck with everything.
Thanks.